Hello and welcome to the CleanSlate theme development tutorial series. My name is Adam, and today we are going to talk about looping in CleanSlate. So specifically, we're going to talk about our loop each, our children each, our descendants, our articles, and our files each. To start us off, let's look at some examples of how to use our children each. We've covered some of this in the profile video, profile index, and profile individual templates. But I'd just like to point out some more examples of our children each since it's so powerful. So this is our undergraduate admissions site, and we have a number of pages under this how to apply page. Each of those pages has some custom page attributes that allow us to fill out these different fields, right? So we can give it a title, a short description, and then a link text and link URL. So this is basically just a page that uses our children each to loop through its children and output some specific content. Another example of using our children each is this social directory. So basically we have on our social.w.edu site, we have a directory of most of the different social accounts that W has across all of our colleges and all of our different departments and what have you. So basically what this is doing is for each, in this directory, this is like a directory index template, and then each one of these directory individual templates has essentially 4 fields or 5 fields, whatever, maybe 6 fields since there's LinkedIn and Instagram and Pinterest. But essentially we have some editable regions on the individual template that house the URL for each of these social media properties. So under each one of these pages, there's pages called Admissions, Adventure West Virginia, Alumni Association, and in each one of those pages we have editable regions with different fields for each URL. So I'm going to just pull this up right here. It's actually the UR social theme on Bitbucket here, and I've pulled it up in my code editor so we can take a look at it. So basically, we're going to talk more about this later, the if statement here, but it uses a variable which we learned about in the last video, and it's checking to see if this variable is empty. If it's not empty, then we should output an a tag, and essentially what it's going to do is it's going to get the page content for the Facebook link editable region on the directory individual page and output a thumbnail image. And you'll notice that this template uses our children each. This is kind of a fun template to look at. If you haven't done anything like this before, definitely check this one out. It's a pretty cool way to use our children each. Whenever you're looping through child pages, if you're using Hammer or Hammer VM to run your site locally, you want to you can use this pages key to be able to show content in your all children each loops. So if you're, for example, if you're using our content for, you can put your different content regions names here and the content that you'd like to show in them, and it will show up locally on your machine. And then for each page, you notice how this is like ID 2, ID 3. You would repeat this for however many pages that you have or need to show in order to mock your data up locally. So looping through children is a super common thing. You'll probably do it all the time. One thing that is also pretty common that you might need to do is, instead of looping through the direct children of something, you might need to loop through the descendants of something. So in other words, instead of just the direct children, anything that starts from wherever you specify and goes deeper from there. So for example, in this case, we are actually starting at the root right here, and then getting the descendants with this label, the name of your label right here, and outputting that stuff into list items. Just to show what this might look like, again, this is the go.w.edu site. They have this page which is chair and leadership, and they have said, okay, these 3 faculty members and these 3 staff members are people we want on this chair and leadership page, but we don't want to repeat their bios from this faculty and staff page. We want to basically pull the content that's already on this faculty and staff page and put it onto the chair and leadership page. And they are doing that via this our descendants each, and have labels on each of these people's names. So there could be like a faculty label or a chair and leadership faculty label right here to pull these three, and a chair and leadership staff label to pull these three. And I can't remember or not if we did it for this page, but we can also limit, say we only want to get labels from, for example, the faculty and staff page. We could use the get page ID tag to limit it to only this faculty and staff page. So we can pass this get page ID. So this right here, we could find the ID of that faculty and staff page and put it into here, and then we could say our descendants labels, and then do our normal markup inside the loop. And again, if you wanted to do this in mock data, the same thing. You would start under this pages key and add in the requisite fields here. If you are pulling content, adding the editable region names under your content key right here, things like that. So that's our children and our descendants. Let's take a moment to look at our blog index again here. I am currently in the brand patterns theme. Any theme with a blog index will work for this. You'll notice that here in the this is our blog engine right here, and we're doing a couple things right here, and then they actually here have a separate each tag. So again, similarly, when we're looping through articles, we're essentially starting our blog here. We're checking if there are no articles and outputting a message, and then if there are articles, we are essentially running the code inside this each for each blog article, right? So every time there's a new blog article, it's going to run through this code. It's going to output a new H2, a new paragraph. It's going to grab the content from the article body editable region. We talked a lot about this in our section on blogs, but it's essentially going to loop through every blog article and run the code in the loop until it's done. And you can change all the stuff that's in here. Any HTML content inside the loop, you can change to suit your needs. If you need to mock this up on your local machine, you can go in your mock data file. There will be a blog key, and then each blog has an ID. And remember, you can have you can have multiple blogs on a site, so each blog has its own ID and then resulting key and value pairs under it. For more on blogs, definitely check out my whole video on making blogs in CleanSlate and how everything works in there. It goes into this in a little bit more detail. So the next thing that I want to talk about is a tag called rloop and rloop each. Basically, this tag allows us to loop over and repeat certain blocks of content. And I find this tag really helpful when I'm working locally, developing a site, writing styles, and I don't want to repeat, like, for example, 20 list items. So we have a number of examples on our CleanSlate help site. If you go to How To's and Tips, Theme Development, Tag Documentation, and click on rloop, we have the documentation for rloop, and there's a number of examples here. So you'll see that, for example, this example right here, it says this content will be repeated 10 times. Rloop has a number of attributes available for it. So one of them is this times attribute, and others are from 5 to 15, and then there's these items and a delimiter right here. So you can say, the delimiter is going to be the comma, and the items are going to be what's output here. So it's going to say first is a list item, second is a list item, and so on and so on. It's going to look like this. Yeah, let's look at how this looks actually in Hammer. I've already got Hammer pulled up, and I've got a template that houses an rloop statement right here. So I'm going to switch over to the code. This is the CleanSlate toolkit that I'm working on, just the backpage template. And just to make it really clear, this is where we're working right here. And what I've done right here is I've essentially said, okay, we are going to basically start a loop, and then this is our each tag for the loop, and we have an item and an index for our loop, and we're going to do it 13 times, right? So if you look at this, it says hello item, item 1, position 1, right? So if I, for example, was working locally and I said, oh, well, I need to add a class to this list item, and I just type my class and hit save, and I go and refresh this and open DevTools over here and go ahead and inspect, you'll notice that my class is here 13 times because I've repeated it in the loop, right? So, I could have this be 113 times right here, and it would refresh, and I don't have to write my class over and over and over 113 times or paste 113 different list items. I can essentially just do that with this one line right here. I can change and say, oh, I need to add another class. I can write, another class right here, hit refresh, and it shows up right there on every single list item. And this could be something else too, like you might have a div with a class on it like card, and then you want to show how many cards are, maybe you have a heading, and a paragraph, etc., etc. You can use this technique to repeat the cards and get some basic content going without having to type out a bunch of HTML and make your template and your HTML really, really long. You can just use our loop, and it's really, really quick. Similarly, there's a couple of other attributes here. You could, for example, loop from the number 3. So if we're outputting 55 items here, or we want to, we're looping through 55 times, but you only want to output the items from 3 to 6. This is what it would look like. So it's going to output the item right here. This is the item number, and then this is the index, right? So it's going to output items 3, 4, 5, and 6, and have its index be 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this is our count right here. And again, you can actually substitute words into here. So if you want to use this items attribute, you can substitute, for example, baseball, basketball, football, and the puck right here. And if we go over to our page, it says hello item basketball, hello item baseball. It's going to essentially output these items into this tag. So basketball, baseball, football, puck, right in this item tag right here. You can also change the separator or the delimiter between different items. So I've gone ahead and added this delimiter attribute, and it made it this pipe character, and then separated each of our basketball, baseball, football with this pipe character, and you can see that right here. It's still outputting the same list here. So you're probably asking yourself, I can see how this would be helpful for some basic local development and save me some time, but how would you actually use the R loop tag in production? On the DIY Outdoors site, there's actually these cards, and each one of these cards uses the same partial and is using the R loop tag to output. So fun fact also that the cards use variables to change the layout, so to have the image on top versus on the side, to add this little arrow thing right here. So we are using our loop to essentially output any number of cards on our page that we want, right? So if I go over to our template here, we can actually bring up this template. It's the DIY Outdoors-V2 template. I actually have this open in my code editor here, and let's look at this. So we are setting a number of different variables up here, and we're essentially having an unordered list with our loop each right here. So we're setting a variable for the number of times that our card will be repeated. And we have a number of different things going on here. So in each card, there's a list item, right? And then there's a couple divs. There's an image, and there is some text, right? Some card body classes. So via variables, we are able to change the editable region name and the editable region scope because we're in the loop, right? We're actually taking these editable region names right here and setting them and using this R item tag, which we just talked about, to make the editable region names unique, right? Because every editable region needs a unique name on the page in order to not repeat the same content that's in one editable region on the next editable region with the same name over and over. So this is an example of how we're using our loop to basically generate a list of list items right here. And we each have, in each of these list items, there's 2 editable regions, there's an image, and there's another editable region over here with the content, and we're outputting them dynamically. Is this strictly necessary for this site? Maybe not, but if you have a site with a number of editable regions that you don't want to have to repeat the code, R loop might become valuable for you. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is R files, the R files tag. So one of the things that we can use R files for is to make unique hero background images. So for example, if I click on Life at W, you'll notice that this background image changes. So on every page, we actually are able to assign an inline style tag that changes the background image for that page's hero image. So how does that look? So actually, this is found in the brand patterns W hero template. I'll zoom in here a little bit for you all. If you look on line 5 here, it actually has this style attribute right here, and then you'll notice that there's an R files each tag, and I've actually separated that out here into this GitHub gist right here. So if you go to gist.github.com/wwebgist, you can see this is one of the things listed there on that index. So let's start from the inside and kind of work out. So this is our R files each tag, and inside here we are using the R file image URL tag to get an image with a size of 1780 by 580. In here we are going to limit it to one image, and we're going to get if there's more than one, we're going to get a random image. And you'll notice that this is inside a style tag, so this is just CSS right here. And we are setting this R files each tag to a label, right? And then this is where we are setting the label. We talked in one of our previous videos about variables and setting variables. So we are setting this BG URL variable right here via this hero background. We're setting it to hero background right here, and we're setting it to the page slug. So for example, on this costs and aid page, right, this costs and aid slug right here is the actual slug of the page. So for this example, that page's label would be cost and aid, cost dash and dash aid dash hero background. That is how essentially these pages are getting their unique background images. They, for example, the background image for this life page would be it would be life dash hero dash background, because we are setting that via this rset var tag right here. So to use this on your local machine, you would go to your mock data file and add a files key, so files : and then you'd have, for each of your files, you'd have this dash, and then this is the image URL. So remember, this tag right here uses R file image URL. That's going to be this, and we're going to kind of output the URL of the image. And then since we are using labels for this example, right, we have the labels right here. We just talked about how it uses our page slug and hero background. We would output the appropriate label in this tag, and that would enable it to show up on our mock data file on our local machine. So that's a pretty cool way to add hero background images and make them unique based on page labels. Let's look at another thing that you can do in CleanSlate, which is galleries. This is a student org template, and they actually have this lightbox thing going on in their template. This is actually run by a jQuery plugin called Magnific Popup, and they have options for a gallery. So to use this on your site, you would include jQuery, you'd include their JavaScript files, their CSS files, and then hook up the configuration as shown right here. And you'll notice that in order to use this, they actually just have essentially, they're going to target a class, and then they have a number of different anchor tags here. For our templates, I believe we use a list tag, but in any event, the only thing that this gallery requires is essentially this markup to be output. So you'll notice that in the href it says path to image. So we're going to essentially output the path to our image via our files tag. So what does that look like? I am actually in UR Super Theme v2, and if you click on the W gallery partial and I scroll down a little bit, you'll notice that in here there's this R files each tag, and it's accepting a type image and getting labels via a variable. And again, we are setting our variable via the page slug. So any page with So for example, on this equestrian site, it says team photos, right? So it'd be team photos dash gallery. It's going to pull any images that are labeled with team dash photos dash gallery and output them onto this page into this structure that we've set up. Inside this R files each tag, we have again an R file image URL. We're outputting a size, we're giving it a title, we're outputting it in a image tag right here, and giving it some alt text. And you'll notice that this alt text is a little bit different, right? It's not a variable, it's actually the R file alt underscore text. So make sure you keep that in mind for future accessibility reasons. So at the end of the day, we're essentially only just outputting this R file tag and the markup required for Magnific Pop-up to take our markup that we're outputting and transform it with JavaScript, right? So if we go in here and look at our images right here, you'll notice that it has this UL class photos. Every photo is in a list item, and it's outputting this anchor tag right here, just like it said in the documentation. So if some sort of JavaScript or jQuery plugin requires a specific markup in order for it to work, know that you can use CleanSlate and the rfiles tag to be able to output that markup the way they want it, so that you can hook up that plugin. And again, if you were going to use this on your local machine, you would add a files key and add your image URL here and add the appropriate label, and then you're going to be able to see it output via the tag itself. If you want to see another example of using a different lightbox gallery that doesn't require jQuery, on the DIY Outdoors site, there's this lightbox gallery right here. This one happens to be called, I believe, Baguette Box, and it's an open source, JavaScript lightbox gallery. I'm not going to go too much into it, but just know that it is on the DIY Outdoors v2 template in its own photo gallery template. There's a lot of notes, and it outputs stuff in a list item with links and gives you an image size here, all that stuff. If you're interested in that and kind of getting an example that goes even more, or in addition to this Magnific pop-up, you can see that there. So that about wraps up our section on looping in CleanSlate. If you would like to learn more about looping and R files, our children each, our descendants each, definitely check out the CleanSlate CMS help site, how-tos and tips, theme development, tag documentation, and for example, here's the R files ATTR documentation. It'll give you the attribute examples, or attributes options available, and then an example about how to use each of these looping tags. So in our next video, we're going to talk about custom page data and custom site data. So stay tuned.